It took a lawsuit from Palantir to get the rest of the government to take it seriously that said, hey, why sign a law if agencies can just ignore it and make it easy to write the justification of buying custom over commercial?
Welcome to the Optimize podcast, brought to you by VisibleThread. The Optimize podcast is your go-to source for expert insights on BD, capture, proposal management, and government contracting. Each series is hosted by an expert in the field, bringing their unique experience and strategies to every episode. We're excited to have Jeff Shapiro as our host for this series. Jeff is a partner at CohnReznick with over 20 years of experience in financial management, federal contract auditing, and compliance. In this series, Jeff and his guests will be diving into the challenges and trends shaping the GovCon space. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on wherever you are listening. Now let's join Jeff on this episode.
Hi all, and welcome to next iteration of the Optimize podcast brought to you by VisibleThread. I'm your host, Jeff Shapiro, partner at CohnReznick. I am thrilled to give you another exciting episode today. We are joined today by the one and only Ross Wilkers. Welcome, Ross.
The tables are turning, aren't they, Jeff?
You beat me to the joke I was going to get to. So Ross, many of you have hopefully read a lot of what Ross has written about in Washington Technology and other publications. He's been covering the government contracting industry for a number of years. He joined Washington Technology back in 2017, and he does his own podcast. So I recently did one of his. So he's returning the favor here and being a guest on this podcast. Ross, to get things started before we get too much into the GovCon side of things, I want to hear about how does someone who starts off their journalistic careers writing about high school sports fall into writing about what happens within the federal government? Tell me that story.
Well, part of it is, and this is an exclusive to you, by the way. Get ready for this.
Wow, already.
I did not realize this until years later, but I had to opt out of covering a swim meet that one Katie Ledecky swam at in high school. So that's part of the sliding doors moment, right? Had I been there to discover who she was then and what she has become, maybe the tables turn, maybe they don't. That's the exaggerated version that I like to tell everybody, though. But to answer the question specifically, I started out as a researcher, actually covering public sector technology spending companies at a media and events company. Then I dove into the media department there at Mosaic. And then in 2017, a job opened up at WashTech. I answered it. And now I crossed the 8-year mark in March.
Congrats. That's great. So yeah, wow. You missed out on history. Not a big deal or anything.
No, but what's funny is, so, as the freelancer, it's a network of people at related publications, right? This local publication, that one. And so basically editors would assign you meet, but it also worked like a restaurant, right? If you got somebody to cover the event you couldn't go to, the editor's like, that's between you, don't care, just get my story in. And so I had a commitment the weekend that I was supposed to cover the meet that I referenced in question. And then I remember reading, I want to say it was like the Washington Post, when they did one of those pre-Olympic pieces on Katie, and it's been lost to the internet through several redesigns. But I remember specifically a sentence in there referencing that very meet that I was supposed to cover back in 2011. I'm just like, damn it. How could I miss?
Yeah, you missed that one. Well, instead, you're here to cover things like the second Trump administration and VAR 2.0 and Doge, things that I'm sure you dreamt about when you joined in 2017, excuse me. Let me make sure I get the dates right. So So here we are. I get the opportunity to ask the journalist questions. So please do not rate my question asking. I mean, I do it for a living, but in a different way. Usually I'm asking about, why did you make that journal entry? So I'm going to try to keep away from the accounting talk, but instead, talk more about the federal contracting, the federal government, what's happening there. So I'll keep you there.
Someone in your position would probably ask the question, why did you do that after I told you that wasn't a good idea? And you probably say it again and again.
So you're telling me to get harsh on you and be like, why did you make that decision? Okay, I could do that.
Well, we're all professionals at it, right? So, it's fun.
Well, teach me as I go. I am open to it, Ross. Absolutely. Teach me everything you know. I am all about taking feedback and acting on it. It's very important. So, all right. Throwing me off, but that's okay. I appreciate you keeping me on my toes. So all right, let's start off. Federal procurement has never been a hotter topic. I know we joked about this a couple of weeks ago when we were chatting over LinkedIn. You've never been busier, I assume, right? Like, how are you picking and choosing what to write about? There's just so much out there. What's the newsroom looking like? I know it's not like it used to be. You're not all gathering up in Midtown DC here, but I'm sure I assume you're doing it virtually. Like, what's that looking like now?
Well, whole lot of Slack conversations, whole lot of huddles, whole lot of Google Meets to update each other on what we're working on, who we need to be talking to, and at Team GovExec, which includes Washington Technology, NextGov, GovExec, Defense One. We'll talk about that. Figuring out as well which stories, developments, happenings have a sort of impact and mattering. I'll just make up that word. What matters to industry and the government audience alike? Because there is crossover, particularly when it comes to this acquisition and procurement slice of public sector, right? The government buys things, industry sells things, and there's a lot of communication that happens internally between some of those acquisition professionals in government and those on the contractor side as well. And as you alluded to, it's playing out in real time. And so sometimes on occasion, the thing you thought you were going to file at 10 o'clock that morning, it turns into something completely different at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock.
Yeah, exciting to say the least. So you're talking with your teammates. You're I assume you're like dividing and conquering. You're like, all right, I'm going to take today's 3 executive orders. How about you take that announcement from GSA? What are you seeing as where your readers going to is what I want to hear about. Like, I mean, I assume that's also part of that conversation. Like, what's attracting the clicks and subscribes to the site? What's been the hot topics?
Certainly the workforce impacts are those that cut across both of them, right? Because on one hand, you talk about what covering the GovCon ecosystem looks like, right? Government does something and industry responds or reacts or has to brace itself for it. And so one of the questions that comes up in a lot of time is as agencies announce workforce reorganizations, reductions, you name it, it goes back to the topic that you and I talked about when you were on the 360 podcast, right? Who am I going to call? Who am I going to go see? Where, I had this meeting that was scheduled in 2 weeks, and now it's somebody completely different that I've never even exchanged an email with, let alone had a conversation with. That is happening on a daily basis across the ecosystem. And so that's a mystery, one of several mysteries that we're trying to solve. And then the other one is, as agencies are looking to change the way that they buy goods and services from industry, some of that by order and directive from the White House, some of that they were working on anyway to try to get in front of those directives, right? The industry figuring out how they may have to rewire themselves completely to do business with the government. That's more of a down the road story, right?
Sure.
But what's happening now is basically it's the industry having to do its homework.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to figure out who your contracting officer. You never thought that would be a difficult question to answer by industry. It's very strange. And then I think that's really interesting that a lot of the traffic coming to you is about the workforce. I wonder if it's people directly from the federal agencies themselves saying, am I next? Let me see what the journalists are hearing. And, am I going to wake up and get that? We hear too many stories of the people showing up to the building, trying to badge in, it doesn't work. And the security guard telling you, oh, sorry, yeah, you've been let go, or trying to log into your computer, putting your common access card in your computer, again, not turning on. And you're like, is this an IT problem? Or, oh, I'm one of those people. Have you guys been talking to all these kinds of employees? Have you done those kinds of stories? I don't know if you personally.
Well, I personally may have only written and contributed to one of them, but certainly my colleagues at GovExec, NextGov, and Defense One, right? The way I like to describe it for that is they do an agency-centric stories, and I do industry-centric or company-driven stories, and the anecdotes add up to a theme that is even private sector enterprises don't do this in the way that a lot of agencies are, right? As much as people want to say, hey, the government should be more like a business and run that way. Even businesses don't operate in a situation where, say, human resources actions and directives are being given over X as opposed to a direct email.
Right. Yep. Yeah. No, wild time. So let's make sure we take a few minutes and talk about your sister companies and tell me about what each one covers and what kinds of stories you'd be able to find on each of those sites. I think that's really important for our listeners.
Yeah. So Defense One is, hopefully that's self-explanatory of the title. It's all about the Defense Department, all about its industrial base, especially for, I think I could speak to the industry audience, for it's most of exactly who you think of, right? The blue chip hardware companies, the defense tech unicorns. It's really about less so about the inner workings of the business and management of the Defense Department, more of just how it sets up force structure, right? How it deploys soldiers around the world and what's important to them. So government executive is focused a lot on civilian agencies, and they've really led the way in a lot of the reorganization plans that are coming out of the agencies. Sometimes, within minutes that they're issued, right, and with the help of those that are being affected by it. And then you have NextGov, which is focused on how the government uses and adopts technology, a little bit of how they buy it as well. So there is a lot of overlap between WashTech and the folks at NextGov, and there is overlap as well with the industry audience as well, because a lot of the companies that WashTech writes about provide, technology. They provide software, and the government buys billions of it each year, sometimes not in the way that a lot of people would desire it to be, but that's part of the story.
Certainly a policy directive that we've seen lately in several executive orders. Commercials buying is the flavor of the administration, it was the same the first time around, and quite frankly, it's always been there. It just hasn't been exercised. I mean, the FAR, as currently written, specifically says to prioritize commercially available products and services over other custom needs. And now we have an administration that just says, I can go to the store, I can buy, agile software that can be customized to my need. Why do I need a separate cost reimbursable procurement that'll take me 24 months, that I'm well past my need? I know you're covering these kinds of things. And so what are you hearing? What are you seeing on the shift to commercial purchasing?
I'm in alignment with you on that, right? And just for context about this, the original law, I know the acronym is FASA. I forget what it stands for, but it's
Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act.
Thank you. It was,
at least I'm pretty sure.
It was signed into law in 1994 that says the government must prioritize the purchase of commercially available items and services. Right? And yet, if you fast forward 32 years later, and we've written about this as well, it took a lawsuit from Palantir to get the rest of the government to take it seriously that said, hey, why sign a law if agencies can just ignore it, right? And make it easy to write the justification of buying custom over commercial. Now, anytime a large enterprise acquires a commercially available item, like particularly with software, there's going to be an element of customization, right? And that has to speak to this. Of course, it has to speak to the scaling challenge in government that really doesn't exist in a lot of private industries. Maybe the utility sector, because it's delivering a public good that has to be on at all hours of the day, right? But now, what you didn't have then at the time that FASA was signed, and even when Palantir filed its lawsuit to win the right to compete for software deliveries on an Army battlefield intelligence system, right? You didn't have a Department of Government Efficiency then tasked with the mandate of deploying this across government. You didn't have a General Services Administration with the backing of the DOJ saying, you will do this. Right? There's a difference between saying, well, we're going to make moves and, encourage and change some regulations. Now it's becoming you will do this.
That's right. So it's just more of it's a policy reinforcement, if you want to call it that. And they're going to some extreme ends to see that it happens. So it's really pushing what the executive is in charge of doing. And I'm not going to try going down the road of whether or not certain actions, are within the president's authority or not. We can save that for another discussion with my lawyer friends, but you and I could talk about more about, the impacts on the ecosystem, right? And, how are you seeing, the contractor industry react to these changes? And you're talking with thought leaders all the time and other industry leaders. Like, what are you hearing? How are they adjusting? Are you from your anecdotal conversations, are people getting scared to do business with the government, or are they seeing this as a lot more opportunities? Probably both.
A little bit of both. I will say this, and we've written about this a lot at WashTech, and you've seen this out in the community. We've talked about this. Consulting is becoming like a 4-letter word in the government contracting ecosystem, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, the strong move to outcomes-based contracting is very near here. And how to define those requirements, it's going to be a big challenge. The government is going to need consultants, whether it likes it or not. I think government employees are good at executing. They understand the field, they understand their missions better than anyone. But when it comes to changing, when it comes to new technologies, I mean, so many of these agencies work off of 1980s mainframe still, right? You know, how the heck do you change from working off of COBOLs and mainframes to cloud-based computing? That's not an overnight process.
It's not. And I mean, one of the reasons why that I focus a lot of my attention lately on this whole what is consulting thing is because the government is getting really, really cranky about that line of work. With consulting. And look, they're picking on some companies in particular about it and asking for a lot and demanding a lot. But nonetheless, right, that's the backdrop for it. Is anytime you're doing a job of scale that, and again, it's required by the government in a way that a lot of private industries are not, there is always going to be an element of advice, consulting, and engineering that goes with it. And all I have to do is I can pull up my LinkedIn app at any time and see some of my friends that work in software development and engineering in the industry. They all of them have the job title consultant in there. Now, I think that's going to change because of the climate that we're in. But nonetheless, right, the role of advice and knowledge, that's always going to be something that the government contractor is going to have to provide. Now, what that looks like if we were to tape this again in the spring and summer of 2026, there are several sliding door scenarios that go through to be specifics. But the point I'm trying to make here is that with the private sector bringing in they're bringing in a knowledge set that the government is literally reducing in force out of the agency. Now, that doesn't mean that contractors are going to get more money and revenue necessarily, right? But the point is that they're going to be relying more to deliver expertise and product that it's just not going to be done in-house.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how the government can't need some kind of change management help. Like these folks who have been working at these agencies 15, 20, 25 years, they've been used to doing certain things the same way for so long. And yeah, I think we all want efficiencies from our government as taxpayers. But when you change a process so dramatically, it's not just, hey, do you now need to learn how to do AI, but there's a culture to it as well. And that's one of those words, is that on the executive order list of words that you can't say, but I'll say it, that like workforce culture will have to change to adjust to these new technologies, processes. And do you think the government has enough internal resources to do that? I don't know how they can.
They're literally being reduced in force out of the agency. If we just want to be brutally honest and plain about that, that's what's happening.
Bingo. Yeah, then you're segueing exactly where I want to go. So simply put, there's just less people working for the government, and that was the whole intent of what's going on. And that's fine. And we want the technology to take over and figuring out, they determine the workforce should essentially, when the government closes down, you determine who's essential. Well, isn't that what the government should look like then? And just be essential people all the time? So we'll soon, I would think, see the results of what an essential government looks like in terms of how people, get their benefits from the federal government, how people are protected and go through airport security and all those kinds of things, and what that looks like. So what'll happen next? Those federal employees, how are you seeing how they're adjusting? You no longer have 6 bosses, you have 1 boss. Maybe it's a good thing. But you also can't turn to many colleagues because they've all taken an early retirement or have been riffed. I don't know. What are you seeing there?
A lot of federal employees are not on LinkedIn, but some of them are, and the ones that are using their megaphone there to speak on behalf of their colleagues, which you gotta admire that voice for the voiceless and everything. But not a day goes by that I'm not scrolling through LinkedIn, scrolling through Facebook without seeing some sort of job fair, job training, job networking, resume writing thing for federal employees that either just exited the government or decided to take the exit ramp. Now, the transition for employees has usually looked like if they wanted to stay in public sector or public service, that'd say, hey, I'm done with my federal career, but I want to continue the mission, right? So I go to one of the government contractors, right? I go to one of my former clients and, I signed the paper, the ethics form, all that, cooling off, and then go into industry. I don't know what that looks like now because of the overhang and the climate and all the factors that we spoke of earlier, particularly with this climate of a cranky customer toward certain contractors. Maybe you're a little more judicious if you're a federal employee of deciding if I want to stay in public sector or public service. Maybe I take an avenue where there's less visibility for myself, where I can, just do heads down, do the work, or you go to a different industry entirely. Now, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what the appetite is for contractors to hire vets that have exited or are taking the exit ramp, right? But, hopefully enterprises, even in different industries, see the value that a former federal employee will bring to their company, right? Because it's not so often that other industries get to look at a resume and see that they stayed in one place for 15 to 20 years, right? If that doesn't scream loyalty to you, I don't know what does.
I agree. I think there are a lot of very talented formal federal workers out on the street now, whether they were one of those probationary employees who just joined at the wrong time, or the ones that took early out because they were just too afraid of being riffed. So they chose their own adventure. So I could speak a little bit to personal experience. As someone who is old enough to have been with Arthur Andersen and seeing the Enron scandal going on, I knew the firm was going. It was done. I knew, who was going to make my choice, the firm or me. So my case, I found something that suited my skill set and moved on to an industry job. Others took the spin out and did just fine. I'm not going to try to compare that kind of thing to what's going on now, but all I can say is I empathize with anyone who's listening, who's going through that, who's been a federal employee, and know that you have very valuable skills that many contractors absolutely need. As Ross, what you just alluded to, like the government's not going to stop buying. It's how it buys is probably going to change. Where it buys, where it concentrates, certainly going to change. But it's still going to be there. And oh, by the way, your skills will translate plenty to state and local agencies, other nonprofit organizations, foundations, you name it. There's a ton of opportunity out there. And, I'm optimistic for you as someone who employs tons of former federal employees. Oh, by the way, I also was a federal employee. I know how valuable they can be. And so I want to speak up on their behalf to say, look, keep your head up, and you'll find the right position for you. And things will bounce back, and then they'll realize, ooh, we do need a lot more hands on deck here. Sorry,
Well,
go ahead,
I was
Ross.
just the governor of Maryland has been very vocal in his statements about, what federal employees can bring to that government. Now, on the other side of the river, you and I are in Virginia, but certainly, Maryland and some of the counties and jurisdictions there, they have been very open about saying, if you lost your job from the federal government, right? It's like the Uncle Sam, poster from the 40s. We want you. They're saying that. And I would imagine that that's happening all across the country as well, because federal employees are based in all 50 states. Certainly, we live in the largest concentration here in the national capital region, but there are pockets of them all across. So I wouldn't be surprised if you heard a lot of governors charging the local agencies there to basically scout for former feds. Would not surprise me.
I agree. Good stuff. All right. So I can't have a podcast with a journalist and not give people a little bit of a primer on journalism 101, and especially in an age of a lot of social media. You have already confessed to being a scroller of Facebook and LinkedIn. Nothing wrong
Mostly
with it.
LinkedIn. Mostly LinkedIn. I've had to draw a boundary on Facebook. But if somebody were to say Ross Wilkers is a LinkedIn addict, the answer would be yes, because the conversation in our industry that I cover, if you're around, it happens on LinkedIn.
Yeah, there you go. And so that's where I'm going. So LinkedIn, we'll say Twitter/X. Like, how do you take what you see on these platforms and figure out what is truly newsworthy, what is trustable? What's that process look like? I think that's really important to talk about.
Yeah. So just even despite my LinkedIn addiction, right? Like, I mean, I am at events, even the ones that I don't cover.
I was going to get there too.
That.
Okay. Yep.
But
keep going.
so, I give my card out when I'm there and whatnot. But, LinkedIn is a good place to connect. And LinkedIn is a good place where if somebody says something, you can click on their name and see their background, see where they've worked, and sometimes inside government and out. And you can just tell by looking at that, right? Oh, they're in a position to know stuff, right? Based on what they're posting. And I do need to do a better job of following up on a lot of what people post. But there's a reason why people post stuff. It's not just like, hey, this is what they're trying to start a conversation, and they're using their megaphone to tell the ecosystem what's going on. And the other thing that to tell is if I see people posting about the same topic, maybe the specifics are, something I'm not comfortable. I wouldn't be comfortable publishing, but they definitely establishes a pattern and a theme of what's happening now. Some folks are certainly closer to the action than others that have a more direct ear as to, again, what agencies are up to and how industry responds. But it does add up. It helps add up to what the picture looks like.
Yeah, that's great. And then now, how do you add that up with? I'm sure you have sources, within the government, those who lobby the government, those who, former government employees. You can talk about how you interact with those individuals to report on the issues you're seeing.
Yeah. And in the industry too, because industry, is full of former feds. And so when, you know, I don't do this kind of reporting, but I'll just, use it as an example, right? Is for a lot of what I do, a lot of national security reporting, uh, what the 3-letter agencies are up to, right? Is current employees talk to federal employees and federal officials. And the advantage that a lot of formers have is once you're out of something, you're better able to contextualize it for somebody who hasn't been there, right? So, I think this is particularly helpful, as somebody who covers the element of that federal acquisition and procurement, right? I've never had to sign that change order. I've never had to sign that modification, right? But having someone who used to do that work in industry or, making decisions in industry, it's kind of like, they help say, well, yeah, this is how it works, but I'm better able to tell you what it means, kind of thing. This is how you should think about it, right? For those that are involved in the mission day to day, right? Like you admire it, but to some extent they have to be heads down, right, and not think about the bigger picture and the context. This is so focused on execution, but having folks that I can talk to that have more mental energy to see that bigger picture, those are the folks that I find helpful. So I hope that's helpful.
I think that's really cool. I appreciate that you do that. I mean, because look, I'd be really disappointing my listenership if I don't ask a journalist about how do we spot fake news. All right, and let's limit this, and that can go off the rails quickly. All right, but let's just talk about fake news just in relation with the policy making that's going on right now. Project 2025 is a real document. It's been published, and a lot of what has come out as policy in the administration has come from that document. But some parts are still, people are saying it's going to happen and it hasn't happened, and that's just an example. But, how do you separate what's fake and what's real? And, what are your tips for listeners on that?
Being a financial journalist as well, who covers, especially the publicly traded government contractors, I think I've learned a bit of their messaging, and they tend to talk sometimes with a more conservative outlook, right? So they say, well, they give you the different sliding door scenarios, right? They're like, well, we'll meet this financial metric, if these things happen, or, if this other things happen, this is what we're banking on, right? And I think that's true. That especially holds true for this stuff as well. And I will abide and offer you this rule that my business journalism hero on CNBC, Dave Baber, once spoke about on air, right? Where he goes by a 1 to 20 rule, where it's like, out of every 20 things that I hear, phone calls, emails, messages, you name it, one of those gets to, I could go to air with, right? And I apply it to this stuff as well, right? If I got on this podcast or on my byline or on LinkedIn, if I wrote, tweeted, spoke everything that I and my colleagues had been hearing since January 2020, your heads would be spinning. We hear a lot of stuff, right? And, the way I try to prioritize, what I'm comfortable going to the byline with or going to air with on the podcast is if I can see written documentation of something that the government is doing, thinking about, or adopting to do, especially if somebody signed their name to it, I'm confident in that as well. because, and look, we all have human sources that we talk to, right? But different people have different access levels to the kind of information, right? So the further that you go outside of the circle, right, the less reliable, valid it gets. And that's not to say that people deliberately lie. People think they know. It's just that people have a habit of filling in the vacuum of information with what they think is what they're predisposed to think is happening already, right? And so, just another thing about, journalism, right? And with, abiding by that 1 to 20 rule and somewhat being, relatively cautious, right? Is that things change, right? Sometimes the goalposts and the white lines move underneath, especially now when people's minds seem to change every 5 minutes, right? And so that's why, when you read a story and you wonder why there are phrases like, is expected to, is poised to, appears as if it's going that way, right? We're not doing that as an easy out, right? It's just, this is the best that we know. Try not to tell you what's going to happen as well. And that's one of the filters I think I use that, in sourcing is the more certain somebody sounds of what's going to happen, the more questions I have to ask.
Yeah, I like that and appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, until you see a press release, until you see that executive order, like the FARP 2.0 stuff, that was the worst kept secret for a while. But you couldn't come out and say it's happening. You just all indicators are leading to large reformation.
And that's another thing, right? Is, and I learned this especially, right, in covering this CMMC cyber certification, right? So that it was such a gossipy topic, right? And I think there were changes, but the big picture didn't change, right? Which was contractors, you have to certify that I'm not buying stuff from China, right? That's basically what it is in the practical sense. With the FAR acquisition rewrites, I would ask the industry, are the specifics really that important? Or should you be spending more time focused on the themes that they're projecting out of it, right? I would argue that it's the latter. That it's going to end up being a lighter load for acquisition workers to go by. Or have a very good impression that the commercially available preference is going to emerge out of that. Is changing one sentence and one subpart of a section, should you really be spending your time on that? I see you shaking your head no. And I would argue no as well. And I know that this is something that the rest of the service provider community, especially those that work in business, development, capture, proposal, and coaching them, right? The theme should be more paramount for that. And that's what you should be reacting to, because I like people in this industry. It's an interesting one to cover. Sometimes we can get out of our skis, ahead of our skis a bit, and overreact to things without seeing the bigger picture.
Yep, 100%. I mean, it's just an easy visual. Be like, here's the FAR. I don't have it on my desk today, so otherwise I put it on camera. It's like, because we're going to make it only this big, it's going to revolutionize how we buy stuff. Could it? Maybe. But we've had the power the whole time, and all we really have needed to do is just train people better, find the right people. Typical, let's call it business problems. I mean, the business of government. It's a business problem to have people who have been hesitant to change, have they been doing something for 10, 15, 20 years. So it's just it's a training issue more than the regulations restrict me from being able to buy this quickly. No, they don't. You just want to do it that way because that's the way you've been doing it for so long. You just don't want to try the other way because you're afraid to mess up. Then maybe that needs to be changed. Like, we need to take off, you keep the guardrails, but adjust the consequences for how fast you drive.
Well, and this is where I think, I think it's fair in order to go to bat for the acquisition workforce a bit, these contracting officers that make that. So, true or false, the FAR does give flexibility to agencies for innovative, say, alternative procurement methods. Is that true or false?
I would say true.
Okay. How the hell am I supposed to find that if I'm one of those people? If the FAR is if it's 2,000 pages,
that's
right?
fair.
Like, I want to do it. Where am I supposed to find it? Right? It's a lot easier to do it in a 100-page document than it is a 2,000, and it speaks to that element that you spoke of earlier, right? Training, right? How much, how long has the ecosystem been talking about acquisition reform? Right? It lasted before I started doing this stuff, right? And
it's an evergreen.
Evergreen topic, and I forget which of the publicly traded CEOs said this on one of the investor conferences in January and February, and he was asked by one of the analysts about the topic of acquisition reform. It comes up. He didn't really answer the question about what he wanted to see reform. He shifted it to the training of the workforce, right? Because a lot of them don't know about these methods, right? And if the playbook is 2,000 pages, I got so many other things to do. I'm not going to search the 1,950 pages I haven't read, and I'm going to stick to the 50 that I know because it's too much.
Point taken. I get it. And, there have been a lot of initiatives, Defense Acquisition University, the National Contract Management Association has done so from a public-private partnership, if I can say it right, so to speak. They've been trying to work together with contract professionals on both sides, be like, let's work together to develop these solutions, given the parameters that we have. And so there's lots of good tools been out there. There was a training core of contracting officers that have been developed to, again, think innovatively and push these fast acquisition processes when it makes sense. And
I would be interested to read some of these case studies, right, of how did all this stuff build upon these regulations over time, right? How did it get to 2,000 pages? How much of it was jumping at shadows, and how much of it was, to fix or defend or kick out bad behavior? I would argue, and I sort of made this, I sort of wrote about this, Monday, right? What if the ultimate fix to this was, hey, maybe just don't award that company the contract and tell them why they didn't win it? I don't know. Does that fix the behavior that you don't want in public sector in the ecosystem? Is it that simple? I don't know, right? But I would imagine that everybody that's taking a hard look at the acquisition framework is asking that question.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's going to be a challenge as we all, as an industry and the government themselves, adjust to whatever ends up changing here. And I know the administration wants it to change right away, and I'm sure industry wouldn't mind a change right away, but that's just not going to be reality. So a lot of patience and grace will be needed on both sides as we try to figure out whatever this new direction may be. But this is the time for industry to speak up and speak their mind, be like, look, I've been selling commercially for 100 years, and this is what works. So bring it forward and say why that's a safe way of doing things, why that's a fiduciarily responsible way of doing things. All that kind of good stuff needs to be voiced.
That, frankly, is where the trade associations are coming in, right? And you're seeing some of those recommendations that they putting out. I will say, in terms of making your voice heard, is when agencies put out requests for information and when they post things in the Federal Register of what they're planning to do, if you don't respond to it, they're not going to know they're doing something that you don't want them to do or don't think it's a good idea. Now, as with a lot of things, this is true in customer service, and I think this is true in GovCon as well. Don't just tell them how it sucks and it's terrible and all that.
Oh, do not complain. Yeah,
do not complain. However, the more detailed, the more specific, your feedback is with the experience, the more likely that someone, especially in this climate where they telegraph a position of wanting to take a fresh look at things, the more detailed, more specific, and the more constructive your response, the more likely that someone at the desk is going to notice that and go, oh, I learned something here from this. I'm going to follow up on this and take it into account, such as, hey, I've been selling commercially for however many years it is, and I just keep getting ghosted. Why am I getting ghosted? Now, sometimes you may be selling something that they don't want. On the other hand, there are clear issues and we'll call it structural issues in process and framework that they're addressing.
Absolutely. So you're spending a lot of time with industry, a lot of time with government leaders. Where are you spending this time? And maybe this should be time our listeners should also be hanging out some certain symposia. I know we met at a George Mason event not too long ago. And so what other places have you found useful for getting good information, getting ahead of understanding where federal procurement is heading, where certain agency priorities are going in terms of what they want to buy, that kind of stuff?
The industry conferences are particularly valuable, whether it's the ones WashTech hosts, whether, Mason puts on a good program. The Professional Services Council, one of the trade associations, they put on an acquisition conference every year. And then they do another one in the fall. The webinars that all these law firms are putting out every day, I feel like I'm getting a new invitation, right? Hey, come to this webinar and learn, about FASA, for instance. I'm still trying to learn about how that law works because I cover a lot of companies here at WashTech that don't sell to the government under FASA. But that's probably going to change, right? As we get,
it's all going to change.
We get further
Ross,
down.
That is a thing you can count on. Change will happen.
Change will happen. That's right.
Sorry, keep going.
No. So, certainly, I don't know what the summer looks like for events, but look, I'm doing the best I can to be out and about. With all this transition stuff, you could see where I am, right? The Falls Church News Bureau has been where I've been planted for a fair number of weeks, but I'm always looking to get out.
Good. So besides you, who else should our listeners be following for information? I mean, obviously, all those, the publications you talked about, they're all free, aren't they? I should know that.
WashTech is subscription. The rest are free.
Good. And then who do you recommend folks be following for good news in the space? You have a couple of names or groups that you've been trusting as being a good source for keeping ahead of the times, keeping on top of it. I mean, the law firms aren't, I think some of them, you get on their news list, you'll never lose that, but they can be a pretty good source too.
There are attorneys in the government contracting ecosystem. Is that what you're telling us?
Did you know that?
I love the attorneys. Particularly when it comes to explaining bid protest situations, as long as they're not the ones that are, arguing the case. And
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I forget his name, but I love this one. He'll always post a protest situation, and he will start out the sentence with something to the effect of, "If you want to win, you must this," or and then. But I think my favorite one more than that is he'll go, "You cannot win a bid protest if this," because he's probably been pitched that,
Love it.
thousands of times, right? And he's like, "No, you can't win doing that." The attorneys are helpful. The Rolodex of service providers, those that work in the business development, capture, and proposal, so they regularly post good libraries of contract opportunities and principles that companies should be thinking about. And I'll give a special hat tip to those, because as somebody who covers spending obligations, right, how government spends its money and how contractors try to fund it. Look, those resources are valuable anecdotes and data points for what the government is looking for, large, big, and small opportunities. Because, I mean, I joked about this earlier, right? But you don't want to be cold calling the government with trying to sell something that it did not ask for in the request for proposals. They react violently to that, and sometimes for good reason.
Right. Love it. Hell, as being one of those former government buyers, I can't say that I came out and attacked anyone when someone really pissed me off with a terrible response. I just threw them out. I just said thank you, but no thank you.
There's a way to look. If there isn't a direct opportunity that you see, that doesn't necessarily mean that the government is not interested in it. They just don't want a cold call sales pitch. And that's where partnering comes in. That's where showing up at these industry days and others comes in. There's a way to do that with more tact. And a lot of these large contractors that have been doing business with agencies for many years, right? Sign the capabilities exchange agreement. Demonstrate it. Right? What's the worst that can happen out of that, right? This teaming is what makes the public sector ecosystem go around. And for as much time as I spend and have to spend covering companies on our top 100 rankings, they don't do everything. They can't do everything. Maybe you're one of those companies that does the things that the biggest of the bigs can't, right? There's still a place for you.
Sure. I love that. That's good advice. All right, Ross, what question did I not ask that I should be asking you? Come on. Well, you've been sitting here going like, Jeff, why aren't you asking me about this? What's the matter with you?
Oh, man. I'm surprised you didn't ask if I think the industry is ready for all these changes.
Okay. Let's end with that question. Is the industry ready for these changes? Thank you.
This is how I'll answer it, right? Just, we were talking earlier about commercial versus custom, right? And how the government, that's not going to be a binary decision that the government makes. So custom is not necessarily going to be thrown out. And I'll just give you an example we were joking about earlier. So Jeff Shapiro, give me the commercial business case for a nuclear powered submarine. There isn't one.
Yeah, no, I don't think I can come up with it.
There is not a commercial use case for an unmanned aerial vehicle that delivers weapons and payloads, right? Not that I can think of. Maybe down the road, there's a black market for it, right? But, take going in a dark place for that, right? But the point is that it's not going to be an either or scenario, because even with everything that we're talking about, right, with the government shape going to be different than what it looks like, there is still a scaling challenge. that the commercial technology industry, especially these software companies, you better be prepared to answer that when you get that question of, this is a cool bespoke tool. It shows a lot of promise. Can you make this work for a team of 5,000 people? You better be able to answer that. You better be able to answer that. And that is where mission knowledge and expertise comes in, right? Because again, right, maybe the source code of that commercial offering, just to stick it on technology, maybe the underlying fundamentals of that are the same, right? Whether it's provided for the power company or a government agency. But the way that it scales across an enterprise is different, especially at departments like Defense and Homeland Security that are very federated and the missions are very disparate and defined, right? If you're in the tech industry, you better be prepared to answer that scaling challenge, because if you're going to a government customer collective that says we want more competition, well, sellers beware.
Absolutely. You said that the other day. I saw
sellers
that.
Beware.
Yeah. 100%. You got to be ready. You got to know what you're getting yourself into, because if you don't cut it, the government will cut you. This is an industry where, I don't see terminations for convenience being taken out. And see that, I don't think that's necessarily in statute, but I certainly see that as just in practice that the government's going to want to continue to be able to have that power that and say, you know what? I mean, then again, if you're not doing your job, they'll terminate you for default. But in order to avoid that kind of confrontation, they'll end up finding a reason to run out of funding and terminate you for convenience, and then somehow reimagine the requirement to get it recompeted. So, I totally agree. Lots of great thoughts there. I appreciate that. You got to be nimble. You got to show results. You got to show your value. It's not just about how many butts and seats you can make sure that office is filled up every day. It's not like that anymore. It's not going to be like that. Maybe never again, no matter who's in charge. I think it really will be focused on how have you increased lethality? How have you kept our people safe? How have you ensured that healthcare gets provided to our veterans in a quicker, more efficient manner? Like that, those are the questions you need to be answering, and how your solution gets us to that. And that's the future. And, some kind of outcome-based contracting is likely where we're going. And that's not a perfect world either. There's lots of risks with that, and how you define that objectively. It gets dodgy. I don't see cost reimbursable contracting disappearing, but acquisition lead time hopefully will finally decrease.
It's really hard to see, well, we have to back up for this, right? So, it's not really, this is a very crude way to describe the coverage landscape, but on one hand, you have, say, the blue chip defense hardware makers, and then kind of everybody else kind of in one bucket. But it's, in reality, it's not really like that, but let's look at the former, right? Defense companies for big systems development, they hate fixed price contracts. They hate them with a passion.
Of course.
Right? Most of everything wants to be cost plus, because the agency, the buyer on DoD, they don't necessarily know what they're paying for, and the defense industry doesn't know what they're developing either, to many extent. And so it forms a partnership there between them, right, on this, where fixed price, outcome based contracting, it puts all of the risk on the industry, but then you get to collect all of the rewards as well. It's hard for certain services. It's hard to see why the government didn't do outcome-based contracting already, right? But, there are commercial industries that don't operate that way either. So it's interesting to see this push toward outcome-based contracting in government when you don't necessarily have commercial uses for it in a lot of instances either. But for as much as industry likes outcome-based contracting for certain things, they like the margin potential of it. I don't know how many of them really understand what that means, where it's like, no. Like, yes, you get all of the reward from it and profit, but you have to take on all the risk as well. You are solely responsible for delivering this technology or this service, right?
Exactly right. To be seen. I mean, we already have mechanisms to reward good behavior. There's incentive contracts if you come in under budget and still deliver what you want, and then all of a sudden your profits goes up. There's award fee contracts that say, listen, you deliver way above our expectations on these specific, measurable, achievable, type of goals, you'll get an even higher profit. Like, there are plenty of existing contracting methods that are not just fixed price. So it's out there, and there's a reason why there's still typically a lot of competition out there in the industry. So we'll see where this goes.
Well, I will see if you agree with this statement or not. Cost plus contracts for consulting are going the way of the dodo.
But how does that look, though? Does it just say, I'm going to buy 10 able bodies for fixed price, and I can quiz them on whatever I want and use them for whatever I want? Make sure that the drones we're designing don't crash land into the Pacific Ocean. I don't know. How does that look? Or they just bring that all in-house, and then when stuff breaks, then they hire it as needed? I don't know. But yeah, pure cost plus, no. Time and material, that's when I'm working commercially, that's typically what I use, especially when we're not exactly sure. It's like, you're hiring me as your consultant to fix your compliance issues. I don't know if it's this deep or that deep. A lot of people think it's this deep. When I ask the question, all of a sudden they're like, you're a lot deeper than you think. And do you want me to help you climb up this high, or do you want to get you all the way to good? So I don't know how you not do that on a flexible price base. I don't know a commercial company I would accept the terms of, I'm just going to give you $50,000 and you'll solve all my problems that I have. I'm not going to take those terms, Ross. Sorry. But we'll see. We'll see. I appreciate the sentiment. Well, Ross, this has been really educational. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us, where you see where the ecosystem is changing, the challenges within the federal agencies, the employees themselves, and how they're adjusting to this new environment, and how you get your sources and how you get your information and your LinkedIn habit. So everyone listening, please connect with Ross. He writes some really great articles and shares lots of great information. You want to stay on top of what's going on in the federal industry, Ross is one of your better follows for sure. And please give us some feedback on what you're hearing today. We want to hear it. We want to, Ross wants some new story ideas. I hear he's lacking in content to create. So please, pester him with some new ideas that he hasn't covered yet somehow. And
aperture's open.
Ross, love it. Ross, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me. Great questions, and happy to do it again sometime.
Fabulous. Thanks all.
And that wraps up this episode of the Optimize podcast. A big shout out to our amazing host, Jeff Shapiro, and our guest, Ross Wilkers. You can connect with Ross through the links in the description. Optimize is brought to you by VisibleThread, the RFP software for analyzing solicitations and contracts, and for creating and editing proposals. VisibleThread is used by 11 of the top 15 US government contractors. For more information, visit VisibleThread.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you are listening. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions on the Optimize podcast.